Hi. Good morning, everyone. So I'm Robyn, and I write for Reuters Breakingviews. And welcome to this panel. I think, like most people here, I spend a lot of my time thinking about tech companies and how they disrupt industries. So it's very rare for me to think about this from the other perspective of those that are being disrupted. And what we have here, we have this morning are two very different companies. So we have Spencer from Fung, which is a global supply chain company, and Bracken from Logitech, which is very well known for computer mice and keyboards. And those businesses have been completely upended by new technologies and new competitors. So I'd like to start off by asking, what exactly does reinvention mean for Fung, and what does reinvention mean, Bracken, for Logitech?
OK. Thank you, Robyn. Hi, everyone. For us at Fung, reinvention really means creating a future from a clean slate. So what we have in the company is called a 3-year planning methodology. Every 3 years, and we're in the current new 3-year plan right now, 2017, 18, 19, we look towards the future. So 2019 is our horizon, and we look at industry changes, we look at all the technological changes, and try to paint a picture as best as we can of the future. And then we basically say, if we don't have a company today, even though we're 110 years old, but we go through this mental exercise, if we do not have a company today, how do we actually have to reconfigure our company to paint ourselves into the future? So the Americans would call it skating to where the puck's going to be. So if you look at our industry and our value chain, at one end, the consumers, they're completely digitized, and there's a lot of disruption happening there. The next stage is the retailers and the brands. They're becoming digital fast, and there's a lot of disruption. The rest of the supply chain is still very analog. So we see an opportunity in this very analog piece that we play in where we can digitize this whole supply chain and modernize it. So our goal now for this 3-year plan is to create the supply chain of the future and at the same time help the lives of 1 billion people in the supply chain. So by working on speed, innovation, and digitalization. When we talk about speed, we mean that we want to act as fast as a startup. Because we think that by 2019, if any company, large or small, doesn't move as fast as a startup, they're going to be dead. So we're taking things that used to take 6 months and boil it down to hours. That's how fast you have to move. And in terms of digitalization, we want to digitalize the entire supply chain so we can connect it all with data and then drive decisions, supply chain decisions based on data to improve speed, efficiency, working capital, traceability, sustainability, and so on. So one example is what we call digital sampling. In our industry, if you want to make an order, a buyer would have to look at physical samples. They have to make samples, a couple of samples over a few months. And now we want to digitize that whole process. So one example is we work with a company called Brand. And Brand is a crowdsourcing platform for clothing. So the experiment that we did with them was we made a digital sample of a product that does not exist. We started selling it, and then afterwards we're actually producing it. So it's changing the whole industry on how it works, and from analog to digital.
Well, it's kind of humbling sitting next to somebody who's running a 110-year-old company, and we're talking about reinvention. I mean, obviously, you have reinvented yourselves many times because you can't survive that long without it. I think if I boiled reinvention down into 2 things, I'd say it's reinvention of what you do and reinvention of how you do it. And sometimes you have to do one, and sometimes you have to do the other, and sometimes you have to do both. And in our case, we needed to do both. So we had to reinvent our portfolio, because everybody in this audience probably thinks of us as a PC peripherals company. But we realized we needed to think of ourselves as a cloud peripherals company. So the platform we were created on flattened out and started to go south, the PC. But all these new things, all these new services that are showing up in the cloud bring new opportunities. So reinventing the portfolio. And the second part was reinventing the culture. And I guess the operative word there is re, because while we're not 110 years old, we are 35 years old. And Logitech still had, I'd say, for most of its life, we've had that small company startup feel. So we lost it. And we lost it for 4 or 5 years as we changed people and brought in people from very large companies into us. They applied what they thought was the best practice. But that best practice was a big company stifling political bureaucracy. And we needed to reinvent ourselves and find our way back to that fast, responsive, focused small company.
So Bracken, I'm very glad you mentioned culture because I think this is a very timely topic. So you see in the headlines that you read all about culture in Silicon Valley, culture at Uber, et cetera. So and what struck me is that this is a 110-year-old company. This is a much younger company, and I'd be curious to know just what happens to culture when a 110-year-old business and a 35-year-old business is going through such incredibly uncertain times of transition and change.
I can go first. I think in my case, I entered the company 5 years ago, and in many, it's completely different from you. I think in many ways I had it quite easy because the business was in trouble. We were really lost money the first year I was there. Our sales were declining, and our stock price was terrible. So the result of all that is it's actually a pretty easy company to come into because you can make lots of change and people expect that. And they're also looking to change the culture. Now, as my head of HR, as we call people and culture, our head of HR would say, your culture is first an archaeological dig. It's first figuring out what's already there, and then defining aspirationally what you want to be. And we're still not what we want to be yet. We're still working on it. But I'd say at least we know what we want to be.
Yeah, I think for us, the way I look at culture is a culture is very unique to any company. And usually the culture is what makes a company successful. So if you look at Lee and Fung, let's say in the last 25 years, for the first 20 years, in the last 25 years, we were very successful. We're growing like a startup. We're growing at 23% a year, compounded for 20 years. And it was that very culture of entrepreneurism, fast-moving, perfection, that actually brought us to where we were. But that culture that makes companies successful is the same culture that prevents you from changing. Because of the strong culture, we were successful in another world. When the world changes, that culture is slow to react. So to me, a culture is something that is, it's a living organism inside the company. You can't just change it like this. It takes a lot of time. You look at sort of a bell curve in any company. They're always the early adopters. They're always the detractors. Then you have a big blob in the middle. What we try to do is identify the people in the early adopter stage and say, you know what, if the world has changed, this group is like the Marine unit, it's like the SEALs unit. They lead the change. And with that, they come back with the data, they come back with success stories that they basically keep changing in the company. And then it takes time to change that culture. But I think right now we're trying to establish a culture of nimbleness, of agility, innovative culture, which I think basically would be more suitable for the future world.
So is there anything, in just given the 110-year history then, that you feel is, you can just port over to your next 3-year horizon? And in terms of creating a new culture, is there anything in the past that
I'd like to keep? Yeah, I think what I would like to keep is the deep value of the company. I think the value system of a company doesn't have to change, even when technology advances, if the world is changing. So our value in the company is being entrepreneurial. I don't think we have to change that. Is being a family, and is also being humble. I think these are the 3 values that basically I tell my staff, doesn't matter what happened in the world, I would like to keep these 3 values. These are the 3 values that actually was around in 1906 when the company started. And these are the values that I would like to last for another 100 years. But what we do as a business has to transform. The culture has to transform. We're an MNC that's dispersed over 40 different countries. So we have different cultures in the company that can morph. But the value system is something that we want to keep forever.
So let's talk about another set of challenges, which are the external challenges. What has been the biggest challenge from out? Is it a competitor? Is it identifying a new trend? Is it?
Yeah, I guess I can. For us, I mentioned it earlier. By the way, I want to go back to a point that you just made. I think if you look at companies that are more than 30 or 40 or 50 years old, I think the one I have trouble finding one that doesn't have one critical cultural behavior, which is humility. You brought up humility. I would have said humility. I think. And the reason why I think humility ends up being such an important aspect of culture is because if you're going to survive, you have to realize that you're making a tremendous number of mistakes all the time, and you're constantly trying to repair those and then learn from them. And so humility ends up being the factor that gets. The opposite of humility is hubris, which is overconfidence. And so a lot of companies that end up getting in trouble and not getting out of it have hubris as a factor. Now, to answer your question, for us is really simple, and I'll be short. We were built on the back of the PC. We surrounded the PC with products. The PC was growing. So you said 23% for 20 years, which is amazing. We grew a double-digit top line and bottom line for 10 consecutive years, kind of the midpoint of our life. But the PC was growing. We were adding products around the PC. The music stopped when the PC stopped growing, and then there was nothing else to add around the PC. So we had to get into new things, and we started trying to do things and they didn't work. So that was the big factor for us. It wasn't competition. It wasn't some technological change.
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest really issue I have now is mindset. It's both the mindset of myself, our own company, and the entire industry. We are in an industry where apparel is the biggest portion of our business, and the apparel industry all along the supply chain, from the cotton fields to the factories to everyone, all the way to the retailers, hasn't really changed in about a few decades. So the mindset is my biggest sort of issue. When I think about the problem that we're trying to attack now, is not trying to get from a traditional industry to a new economy industry. I can read about it, I can learn about it. This is actually something that I think it's a little bit easier to change than the mindset. I can learn about AI, I can learn about blockchain, I can learn about data, and all the new stuff that can go into a traditional industry. But what I cannot control is the mindset of the people. I have to convince them one by one. So I first started convincing myself that the world has changed. I educated myself at a place called Singularity University. I think some of you might have heard about that, and that was completely transformational. Then I brought my whole management team, about 80 people there. Then I brought 200 people there, and now we're trying to transform 22,000 people in the company in terms of mindset. The next stage is transforming our customers and our suppliers. These are the players along the entire value chain, with the same mindset that we used to have. So I think changing the mindset of the entire industry is the biggest challenge I have today.
What is the biggest thing that's holding people back then?
Well, in terms of mindset, I think people, we're all like a creature of habits. Human beings, have evolved for millions of years not wanting change. Right? For the most part, for millions of years, we lived in the same village. We never venture out in the same time zone. Once every 3 months, we may go to the next village to see a friend, and that's it. Right? We're conditioned to do the same thing every day for our entire lives. So in an era where changes are happening on a daily basis, and business models are being disrupted on a yearly basis, that change is actually, to actually go through those changes is very uncomfortable. So to really get people to change and change their mindset, that's really the most difficult thing. They see it, they hear it, but they don't want to do it, right? So how do you get people to do it? That's the biggest challenge.
So what is the point when you view your task of reinvention and transitioning the business as finished, or is it ever finished? I could
probably jump in on that. I'd say it's never finished. This is like the cliche answer, but I mean, I think if you went back and asked any of my predecessors at any point in time, they would all say, "I need to reinvent this company." And so now I think everybody in this room would probably agree that things just get faster and faster and faster, and change keeps accelerating. And so it's the difference between my predecessor's task and our task, or your task, is that the reinvention cycle's just shrinking. So I think you can't afford to think of your company as a steady state ever. So you're constantly in reinvention. That's the reason why the most important thing we're doing with our company is centering it around design. Because design is about continuously changing. The biggest problem with design under its definition today is this. Is this is so well done, this is verging on perfection. This is the best outcome of design you can have, and it is something we should all shoot for. The problem is that design and redesign, when it comes to a company and a culture and a meeting and a budgeting process and an on-stage execution, will never be that perfect, but can always be improved and always be rethought. And that's what design and design thinking is all about. So that's really the focus for our company, to try to set ourselves up for a continuous reinvention through design.
Yeah, I completely agree with Bracken. I think reinvention in today's world, and especially in the future world, will never stop. You have to create organizations that can constantly renew itself and never rest on the laurels and be hubris and be stuck to any model. Even the fastest and most innovative companies today that we see have to reinvent themselves. You know, if you guys have heard of Clay Christensen and the disruptive innovation, you know, in the old days, you used to have the incumbents competing in one field. Then you have the disruptors, right? So the disruptors come once every, I don't know, a few years, 5, 10 years, and that's it. Now what we're seeing now is you have the incumbents, you have the disruptors, but then you have several layers of disruptors. So there are people trying to eat your lunch many levels down. So if you're in the incumbent and you try to reinvent it yourself once and compete with the disruptors, think again, because there's another few layers trying to eat your lunch. So you basically have to constantly reinvent yourself, and you have to create a company that is nimble and fast, that can react to changes very quickly.
I love this topic because, you know, I think, you know, you're looking at two guys sitting on a couch who are sitting ducks. We are absolutely, anybody in here can beat us at any single thing we do. And I hope you know it. I think you do. I do too. So we know we are vulnerable. Every large company, and we're not that large, but every large company is easy. I mean, you could get 5 people in this room to do anything that I do today, and within 3 months, you could come up with a better product than we have. And within 6 months, you could have it in market. And the only difference between you and us is that we probably have scale in a couple of areas you don't. So that does nothing but protect us. And unfortunately, it falsely gives us comfort. And so we have to completely destroy what we think about our companies. Because if we don't, you are going to eat our lunch one bite at a time. You're going to eat us each one bite at a time. It's just the way the world works now. And yeah, I think large companies generally do view this. You know, I think if you talk to other people in our chairs, they'll all say, what's the biggest threat you have? Your own success, your own size.
So we have about 6 minutes left, and I'd like to sort of conclude with a very simple role-playing exercise.
Uh-oh.
So pretend I am a fresh university graduate. And both of you now have about 5 minutes to convince me why I should work for Fung, why I should work for Logitech, and not for Facebook or Alibaba.
I'm going to go first? Okay. Okay. So you can, look, first of all, I'd encourage you, if you can, go to work for Alibaba or Fung, or go to work for really Apple or Google or Amazon or Facebook. It's a great place to learn. They're amazing companies. Or go do a startup, because they're amazing and fun and responsive and quick. Now, Logitech sits in the middle of those two. And if you're a strategic consultant in the audience, you'll say, you guys are doomed, so don't go to work there. But I'll tell you why we're not. Because what we are is we're a place where we go into categories that are smallish, where for the big companies, they're not very interesting. For the small companies, they're quite interesting, but they don't have our route to market or our supply chain advantage. So what we're doing is we're creating a whole series of startups like you inside our company. So today it's 22, tomorrow it'll be 30, one day it'll be 50. So you can experience what you experience with the startup, with the focus, the flexibility, the agility, but with a couple of big differences. One is, if it doesn't work, and most of your startups won't work, I'm sorry to say, we'll give you a bonus and we'll move you on to a new project. And the second one is you'll have the advantage of our supply chain, which is the biggest challenge you've got. You'll be able to take your product, your experience, whatever it is you're creating, and bring it to market with us instead of having to do it by yourself. So I would encourage you to go to work for either a startup or for one of the big companies. They're amazing, but we're an awfully good place to come second.
Okay, for us, I want to draw back my experience in the late 90s when I was in Silicon Valley in a startup. At that time, we had a few people, we had very little money, we just raised our first round, and we were trying to convince people from large companies with very comfortable jobs and people at very prestigious business schools like HBS that Bracken went to, and convince them to leave the school to join us. What I learned at that time was if you have an idea, if you have a vision and you communicate that vision passionately and you really believe in it, some people will want to join you. Now, I don't want to say that we're competing with Apple's and Alibaba because there is no one-size-fits-all. There are many types of people around this world. Some people want to change the world. Some people want, they don't like the comfort zone. They don't like status quo. And that's the type of people we want to attract. We're not trying to attract people who are looking for large companies that are growing with great stock options. We're looking for people who loves a challenge. Our challenge now is to change the entire industry. It's a big transformation. Our challenge is creating a future that doesn't exist today. And our challenge is also to do all of that and at the same time help 1 billion people in the supply chain. So I'm passionate about my vision, and that's how we communicate it. In fact, we have one example, actually a few examples recently, but the head of our HR just joined us 6 months ago from a very successful company, on the rise with great stock option and pretty comfortable, and he chose to join us. So, it just kind of shows you that there are people out there who are looking for a challenge, and we keep looking for people like that. The way I describe it to my friends of what we're trying to do now, in the business world, I would consider what we're trying to do an extreme sport. It's very, very difficult. It's a little bit dangerous, but boy, if you can do it, it's hugely gratifying. Right, so if you like extreme sport in business, come join us.
It's a real challenge. I'm glad you, great one. I'm glad you asked because it is a big challenge. I mean, how many people in this audience work for what's considered a very big company?
Don't be shy.
No, it's okay. It's good. So, it's really interesting. So the world is, yeah, you can do it again now. Now we can actually see you.
Most of those are our staff.
So, it's a really cool time, though, because what's wonderful, and I go we were talking about this earlier, I go every chance I get to spend time with startups because I have so much more to learn from startups than I do from my peers at big companies. Because startups they're more focused, they're flexible, they're fast. We've got to reinvent ourselves and change ourselves to operate like you. So I wouldn't fool you. If you have the stomach for a startup, do it. It's really, really exciting and fun. And one day, maybe you'll join us and bring some of that energy and drive to our companies. And in the meantime, we better find a way to be a lot more like startups, or we're not going to be around, at least not growing.
Yeah.
Great. Well, I mean, that's all the questions I had. We actually have some time left, so if there's, any last words, any lessons out there for big companies, for startups.
Go first, I'll go second. Okay.
Well, I mean, we're always looking for good talent. So I think one ask I have of the audience is if our vision of creating the supply chain of the future and helping 1 billion lives in the supply chain resonates with you, and if you think of any company or yourself who can help us with our cause, I'd love to hear from you. Send me a LinkedIn. I'd love to hear from you.
So, I kind of think I've said just about everything I have to say, and this is probably the 10th or 12th time I've come to one of these conferences, whether it's Web Summit or Rise or Collision in the U.S. Now, Patty puts these on all over the world. I think they're wonderful because they drive this broad conversation, startups to startups, startups to bigger companies, industry experts to big companies and startups. It's just a really good, broad conversation. I think if I had one parting comment, it would be, don't think of yourself as too narrow. Whatever function you came out of, if you came out as a software engineer, or you came out as an economics major, or whatever you came out of, think very broadly, because the world that we're headed into is not going to reward really narrow specialists. It's going to reward generalists with special skills, with the specialist skills. And I think too much, nobody's saying that anymore. And I think that's a big mistake. Because in a world where AI and other things are going to pick up a lot of these administrative and frankly, some of the more than administrative, real thinking skills, the ability to make links between different areas and different disciplines is going to be the difference between being successful and not. So I would encourage you to be in a constant learning mode, not just within your narrow discipline, but across a very wide range of things.
Great. And that's it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.